Her old horse was a laughingstock, and their family farm hung by a thread because of a greedy creditor. Silas, the predator Crawford, and his ruthless rider were ready to poison their own stallion for victory, unaware it would mark their downfall. But in the hands of desperate Evelyn O'Brien and her loyal ranger lay a strength that could turn the tide of the Wild West's most brutal race. Get ready to discover how one girl, once scorned, showed everyone that true power isn't in speed, but in heart. Selected formula: strength in weakness, contempt, compassion, inspiration, triumph, admiration. Rusty Horseshoes, Golden Dreams. The sun mercilessly beat down on Morning Star Valley, scorching the grass to a straw-like crisp and leaving deep cracks on the parched earth. This was a land where every day was a test of endurance, and life hung by a thread stretched taut between drought and rare rains. The O'Brien family farm, a modest parcel on the very edge of the valley, barely scraped by. A leaning fence, a faded house, a few scrawny cows, all spoke of the constant struggle the family waged. Every drop of water, every sprout in the field, was earned with immense difficulty. At the heart of this struggle stood Evelyn O'Brien, 22 years old. She was slight, but her sturdy shoulders betrayed years of hard labor, and her eyes, the color of a summer sky, burned with an incredible resolve, like embers beneath a layer of ash. Her best friend and sole hope was Ranger, a Mustang whose age was revealed by the graying patches on his muzzle and his deliberate gait. His hide had the hue of a faded, rusty horseshoe, and his mane was long untrimmed. Local stable hands and farmers behind her back called him Slow Louise, nodding mockingly toward Ranger and Evelyn as she saddled him for practice. Evelyn grew up in the saddle, not in training arenas, but on the boundless expanses of the valley, where every stone, every bush was known to her by heart. Her hands, calloused from work, held the reins with confidence, and despite the jeers, she knew. In her hands, Ranger was capable of more than he seemed. They were seen as an odd pair, an unremarkable girl and an old nag. Just a country girl wasting her father's time, people whispered, as Evelyn, thinned by worry, passed by. In their glances was clear contempt, mixed with pity. For in their world, to achieve anything, one needed polish, speed, and pedigree. Evelyn had neither. Evelyn's father, Thomas O'Brien, a strong man but bent by years, watched his daughter with quiet sorrow. His farm, which he had built all his life, now hung by a thread. A massive debt loomed over them, like a storm cloud. This debt they had taken from Silas the Predator Crawford, a man whose name in the valley was spoken with caution. Silas was not merely a moneylender, he was a landowner, owner of the largest ranch, and as rumor had it, a man who knew how to profit from others' misfortunes. His eyes were cold as winter ice, and his smile predatory. Silas's motivation was simple. He wanted to expand his holdings, and the O'Brien farm, located on a key plot, was a tempting morsel for him. He felt no remorse raising the interest on their loan, knowing he was trapping the family. Tomorrow's Valley Grand race was their last chance. The $1,000 prize could save the farm, pay off debts, and give them a respite. But the competition was fierce. Their main rival was Jesse the Shadow Mackay, Silas Crawford's rider. Jesse was young, dark-haired, and swift, and his stallion, Black Wind, was the embodiment of grace and speed, a true thoroughbred. His reputation was impeccable, and he never lost. Tension hung in the air, and every glance cast at Evelyn and Ranger was steeped in doubt. But Evelyn didn't give up. Her primary motivation wasn't fame, but love for her family. She saw her father fading from hopelessness, saw her younger sister Lily, 10 years old, whose eyes were always full of childlike faith, beginning to understand the harshness of their situation. "Mama, Papa wouldn't want us to just sit around." Her sister's simple words, spoken days ago, still echoed in her ears. These words from a small girl became a strong impetus for Evelyn. She knew she had to fight for them. In the evenings, when everyone else slept, Evelyn would lead Ranger out to the field. She whispered words of encouragement to him, stroked his neck, feeling his warm breath. In these training sessions, under the cover of the starry sky, there was no contempt. There was only quiet, persistent work. She studied Ranger's every step, every breath, trying to understand his weaknesses and strengths. In these moments, the viewer begins to feel compassion for Evelyn, her solitude, her struggle against the entire valley, her boundless devotion to her family and the old horse, all evoked involuntary sympathy. She was fragile, but in her eyes burned an unbreakable will. Evelyn knew they would have to run not just for victory, but for their very lives. She was ready to fight. The morning before the first qualifying heats wrapped Morning Star Valley in an uneasy silence. The air was electrified with anticipation, but for Evelyn, each breath was heavy. She went early to Ranger's stall, her heart clenching with worry. As she brushed his mane, her fingers brushed against something amiss. One of the horseshoes was loose, almost imperceptibly, but enough to disrupt the horse's balance and speed. This was no accident. Ranger was well cared for, and Thomas himself had checked him the day before. Evelyn spent precious hours hammering the shoe back securely, but a nagging feeling of intrigue had already taken root in her soul. Who would do this? And why? The first qualifying heat was a cruel confirmation of all her fears. When the starting gun fired, Jesse, the Shadow McKay on Black Wind, literally shot forward. His powerful and graceful stallion seemed to fly over the ground, leaving behind only clouds of dust. Evelyn and Ranger, despite all their efforts, lagged behind. Ranger was panting, his old muscles trembling with strain, but he ran, pushing himself to his limits. The crowd gathered at the barriers did not hold back their laughter and biting comments. "Slow Louise!" they shouted, and these words were like whiplashes on Evelyn's weary soul. They didn't see her effort, didn't understand her desperation, only despised them for their slowness. After the heat, Evelyn led Ranger to a far corner of the stable, away from curious eyes. She wiped his sweaty coat, feeling his heavy breathing. At that moment, she felt particularly acute compassion for her old friend. Ranger gave her everything he could and more. And she? Could she justify his loyalty and her father's hope? Lily, her younger sister, came to them and silently hugged Ranger's neck, her small fingers tightly gripping his mane. In Lily's eyes, there was no contempt, only pure, childlike faith. This small display of support gave Evelyn strength, but the question of the horseshoe continued to trouble her. At night, as the moon bathed the valley in silver light, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Her anxiety grew. She felt that something was wrong, that beneath Jesse McKay's apparent speed lay something dark. Through the cracks in the wooden stable walls, she heard soft footsteps. Evelyn, driven by a sudden impulse, quietly slipped out of her small room and followed the sound. Shadows danced, hiding figures, but she clearly saw a shape bending over Black Wind's stall. It was Jesse McKay. Evelyn crept closer cautiously, hiding behind one of the pillars. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. Jesse held a small syringe in his hand and injected a dark liquid into Black Wind's neck. The stallion flinched, then quieted, his eyes wide. The shock of what she saw was deafening. This was not just a dirty trick. It was a monstrous act against an animal. Jesse whispered, his voice full of cold, ominous confidence. "Now you'll fly like the devil and you'll only stop at my command, Black Wind." At that moment, Evelyn realized the full extent of the deception. Silas Crawford didn't just want victory. He was willing to do anything to guarantee it, stopping at nothing. Black Wind's unusual speed now had an explanation, and it was far more terrifying than any mere doping. It was the slow killing of an animal for profit. Anger boiled in her veins, burning hotter than the hottest sun of the Wild West. Her compassion for Ranger now extended to Jesse's unfortunate stallion. She understood that her fight wasn't just about saving the farm. It was a fight for justice in a world where greed could break any living creature. Jesse's motivation became crystal clear. He was a pawn in Crawford's game, completely dependent on his whims and willing to do anything to maintain his position. Evelyn retreated, her hands trembling, but inside her, a new, unbreakable flame of resolve ignited. She could not let them win. Not now that she knew the true cost of their triumph. The morning of the final Valley Grand race met Evelyn with a cold, biting wind. The air was heavy with anticipation, and the spectators' faces showed eager expectation of the spectacle. For most, it was just entertainment, a chance to place a bet and forget about dull everyday life. But for Evelyn, every beat of Ranger's heart was an echo of her own hope. She approached the starting line, feeling hundreds of gazes upon her. Many openly laughed, others simply shook their heads, looking away. Almost all bets were placed on Black Wind, and only a few, the most desperate or perhaps simply not serious gamblers, put a few coins on Slow Louise, more for amusement than belief. However, among the crowd, Evelyn noticed an elderly stable hand, Randall "Randy" Finch. Randy had once worked for Crawford, but was fired when he refused to keep silent about the injustice he saw. His face was etched with wrinkles, and his eyes expressed sorrow and wisdom. He approached Evelyn, leaned in, and whispered softly, "Jesse's putting something into his horse, Evelyn. It's not just a stimulant. It's something that makes him run at his limit. But then he'll just collapse. Be careful, girl. Protect your Ranger." In his words was an undeniable fear for the animals, for Evelyn, for the honesty that was so rarely found in their world. These words only strengthened Evelyn's resolve, but also added to her anxiety. When the starting gun fired, the ground beneath the hooves trembled. Black Wind instantly shot forward like a black lightning bolt. He flew, leaving all rivals far behind, including Ranger. Evelyn felt anger rising. Anger at the injustice, at the treachery, at the fact that her family's life hung by a thread because of someone else's greed. Jesse McKay, turning back, gave her a smug smirk, his face distorted with cruelty. He was confident in his victory, and this only intensified Evelyn's fury. Ranger, though trying his best, slowly but surely fell behind. Every breath he took was heavy, but he did not give up. His loyalty was boundless. The race continued, laps passing one after another. The gap between Black Wind and the others grew, and it seemed that the fate of the O'Brien farm was sealed. The crowd had already begun to chant Jesse's name, but on the last, decisive lap, something unexpected happened, making all spectators hold their breath. Black Wind, who had been moving with unthinkable speed, suddenly began to stumble. His running became convulsive. He didn't obey Jesse's commands. His eyes darted wildly. The horse, as if seized by an invisible flame, darted from side to side, losing control. The spectators froze in shock. A deathly silence fell over the stands. Jesse frantically pulled on the reins, trying to control the stallion, but it was unmanageable. Evelyn, seeing the horse's agony, felt not joy, but deep compassion for the unfortunate animal. She knew it wasn't just fatigue, it was the result of what Jesse had injected into him. At that moment, her goal changed. Victory faded into the background. Evelyn drastically changed her strategy. Instead of simply overtaking, she guided Ranger towards Black Wind. Taking a risk, she began to overtake him from one side, and then, with incredible precision, positioned Ranger so that he gently but persistently blocked the frantic run of Jesse's stallion. She didn't let him fall, didn't let him crash into the fence. She was, in fact, trying to slow him down to save him. Jesse, maddened, tried to push her horse, but Evelyn was quicker and more agile. Ranger, as if understanding her intention, moved in sync with her, showing incredible maneuverability for his age. This was her unexpected breakthrough, not just to win, but to save. She fought not only for her farm, but for another suffering life. Every maneuver was a challenge to fate, balancing on the edge, but she did not hesitate. Her face was focused, full of resolve, her eyes burned with fire. Black Wind collapsed a few meters from the finish line. The loud thud echoed through the silent valley, and a chilling quiet descended. Jesse McKay, thrown from the saddle, fell beside the horse, his face contorted with rage and dirt. Evelyn and Ranger, though slowed, crossed the finish line, but no one celebrated their victory. All eyes were fixed on the unfortunate stallion, who lay heavily breathing on the ground, his flanks heaving in agony. Evelyn, ignoring the cheers of her few supporters, was the first to dismount and rush to Black Wind. She knelt beside him, her hands gently feeling his neck, trying to find the cause of his condition. Randall Finch, the old stable hand, immediately came up to her. In his hand, he suddenly held a small syringe that Jesse McKay must have dropped in his panic. Randall, his face full of grief and anger, held up the syringe, showing it to the crowd, and then carefully examined the horse's neck, finding fresh injection marks. "It's not just fatigue," his voice trembled. "It's poison that makes them run to their last breath. Silas Crawford poisoned him." The crowd, moments ago silent in shock, now erupted in uproar. Randall's words echoed through the stadium, tearing away the veil from the monstrous deception. Silas Crawford, who had stood with a smug smirk until then, turned pale. His self-assurance instantly evaporated, replaced by panicked fear. In his eyes was the realization that his dirty deeds had been exposed. The sheriff, who had been observing the entire scene from the beginning, could no longer ignore the obvious evidence and the crowd's outrage. He slowly but decisively moved towards Jesse. Jesse McKay was arrested on the spot, unable to utter a word. Then the sheriff approached Silas Crawford. To the whistles and cries of indignation, Crawford was taken into custody. His carefully constructed empire of lies and greed collapsed overnight. In the following days, as the full truth about Crawford's schemes and cruelty came to light, Morning Star Valley seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The O'Brien farm was saved, the debt paid off, and Black Wind, miraculously surviving thanks to Evelyn and the local veterinarian, slowly began to recover on their farm. He was now free from Jesse's cruelty. Evelyn O'Brien, who had only recently been an object of contempt, became a living legend. Her name was whispered with reverence. She was called the girl who saved the valley. Lily, her little sister, now beamed with happiness. "You were so brave, Evelyn," she whispered, stroking Ranger. The satisfaction of victory was deep, but even stronger was the admiration. Admiration for how an ordinary girl, whom everyone had despised, showed an unbreakable will and incredible strength of spirit. Now people would remember not Slow Louise, but Ranger, the horse who ran not just for victory, but for saving another life. And Evelyn, the rider who proved that even in a world ruled by gold, true strength lies in the heart and in the readiness to fight for what is right. Her story became a beacon of hope, reminding everyone that even the weakest can change the world.